It's an absolute pleasure to welcome Mark. I kind of have done my research, but I need a crib sheet because he's so damn successful.
We were together, not section, but we were together, weren't we? Back in, when was it? When did you?
Oh, 95, 96, I think we were graduating. So, yep, long time. And I mean, Mark's career has just been absolutely stellar. So, sort of esteemed academic, a celebrated columnist, and a sort of global brand consultant. Just incredible. His academic career, he's taught at some of the leading institutions in the world, LBS, MIT Sloan, Melbourne. He's published in many of the top academic journals, Harvard Business Review, Sloan Management Review, Journal of Consumer Research, you name it, he's done it. If that wasn't enough, he was in-house brand consultant for Louis Vuitton.
LVMH, yes.
Yep. Moet Hennessy for 13 years.
13 long years.
And I think the CEO now has become the richest person in the world.
Briefly, Mr. Arnault is that. I always find this interesting. Mr. Arnault definitely doesn't care about that, right? But everyone else does. But
so you've obviously been doing a good job.
It's all down to me.
But in addition to that, a successful brand consultant career beyond LVMH. So he's consulted for companies like Subaru, Johnson & Johnson, McKinsey, you name it, he's done it, including WD-40, is that right?
WD-40 San Diego, yeah.
Fantastic. So I think maybe what you're most famous for, however, is your marketing column, your weekly column, which you've been awarded, is it the PPA Press Award for Columnist of the Year
very
5
good.
times?
You've done this very well.
Which is, that's like the highest award in magazine journalism, so absolutely remarkable. Still going strong.
As far as we know. Yeah.
Yep. So it's an absolute pleasure, a delight you've come to talk to us. I think the plan of action, you're going to talk for...
just less than an hour.
Yep, and then there'll be a Q&A. So lots of opportunity to grill him on how to be successful. Mark, it's over to you. It's a pleasure you've been here.
Thanks,
for
mate.
Coming back.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So hello, everyone. Merry Christmas. This is our whole marketing budget for the mini MBA for the whole year. I'm not joking. So I've been doing this for about 13 years. It's lovely to be back at Lancaster. And what we thought we'd do is, this is a sort of précis of what I'll be doing in London tomorrow. For 13 years, we've been doing this semi-wanky kind of rundown of the great marketing moments of the year. And so we're going to give it to you tonight, free of charge. Go quickly through them. I mean, I think the most important thing to relay to you before we begin is how scientific this is. It's very, very scientific. Okay, I've used test tubes and everything to come up with this. So it's very scientific. A countdown from 10 to 1. We're looking at the 10 big marketing moments, but also what the implications are for marketing, as you'll see. So let's start with number 10, sound effects and everything. Elon Musk messes up pricing. So you've got to bear in mind that there's a big difference between price and pricing. We often make that mistake, yeah? Price, obviously, the thing we pay, but pricing the process by which we do it. And the process by which Twitter did it was really stupid. So if you recall, a couple of months ago, once Musk got in there within a week, he'd introduced a $20 fee for the blue tick, which was a bit unusual because until then it had been free. And suddenly he was suggesting it was $20 a month to achieve the blue tick status. And so that illustrates a couple of points about how not to do it. First of all, he'd only been in there a week. He'd obviously done no research on the $20 figure. He had no strategy either, in the sense that why start with the blue tick, guys? You know, pricing is a tactic. What's the underlying strategy here? And then when he announced it, of course, there was this spectacular response. So Stephen King, who of course is one of the blue tick holders, the horror author, announced on Twitter, $20 a month to keep my blue check? Fuck that. They should pay me. If that gets instituted, I'm gone like Enron. To which Musk immediately replied, we need to pay the bills somehow. Twitter cannot rely entirely on advertisers. How about $8, right? Now, this is all wrong, okay? Obviously. First of all, when we do pricing, we don't want to show there's any room for movement, right? No blood in the water. To go from $20 down to $8 is not a good signal. It also more seriously ignores the concept of price framing, right? So what I've learned on my journeys doing pricing is there's the price research, there's the price that comes out of it, and then there's the way that we frame or communicate that price, okay? That last bit is more important than the first two bits. The price itself is not the most important thing. How you present the price, how you anchor the price, how you contextualize the price is the most important thing. And here, of course, what we've got is this thing was free, and now you're going to pay $20 a month for it. That's not how you frame anything, right? That's a ridiculous thing to do. And finally, look at his justification. We need to pay the bills somehow. That's not the way that you justify price. Most of us believe that, marketing and pricing is about value. And handily, value begins with a V, yeah? And it reminds us there are two prongs. One prong of the V goes into the organization. Yes, we have to have a price to pay for everything. But the other prong goes into the customer world and gives value to them. And when we win, we start with that prong in the customer world. We generate, how do we make money for our companies and stakeholders? Generating great value for customers will generate great value for organizations. Here, there's no value to Stephen King, right? He was getting it for free. The value is all about the organization, and therefore it's not the way to do it. So it illustrates the pricing P, the most important P, at least for next year. Yeah, we're obsessed with promotions, with communications, and we've forgotten how to do pricing in marketing, which is a real shame because next year, the most important P by a long way, thanks to inflation at 10%, will be how do we change and increase prices. Remember those three stages. When you do pricing properly, we do research into price, we set the price, then we frame it. Two of those steps are where marketers can really, really contribute. Marketing has never run price, but there was a time, and there are organizations where we input it into price. Most organizations now don't do that because the marketers aren't up to it and the companies don't think of price as a marketing issue. That's dumb because when you don't have marketers involved in pricing, you end up looking at competitors and at costs. And they're both largely irrelevant things to look at. You want to look at customers and value when you set price. So it would be nice if we got involved in pricing again. Okay, number 9. Brands mourn the death of the Queen. So, Her Majesty the Queen sadly passed away this year. Here's a touching tweet about the death of the Queen. It is with great sadness that we acknowledge Her Majesty the Queen's passing. For 70 years, she stewarded us through our darkest and brightest days. Thank you, Your Majesty, R.I.P. And this touching message of condolence comes to us from the British Kebab Awards, yeah? And it was a part of a cavalcade of tweets and messages about the death of the Queen that came from brands. We had Playmobil doing like a dead Queen type thing. A little bit tasteless. We had Shrek's Adventure Playground tweeting, Shrek's Adventure London joins millions of mourners around the UK and the world in paying tribute to Her Majesty the Queen. We had Jimmy's Dildo Emporium, right? So, you've got to have a dildo slide, do you know what I mean? I learned that at Lancaster. Jimmy's Dildo Emporium. Everyone associated with Jimmy's Dildo Emporium is saddened with the news that Her Majesty the Queen has passed. As a mark of request, we will not tweet from this account for the next few days, yeah? It's what you would have wanted, yeah? And this is the worst of them, right? This is Thomas Cook. Yeah, it's not good, right? Safe travels, man. So this doesn't damage, shit, but it doesn't damage brands. That's not my point. My point is it's symptomatic of something much worse, which is brands overstating their general importance, okay? If there's one thing we have learned more than anything else in the last 10 years, it's that brands are little little things, unimportant things. Yeah? And marketers forget that because they work on their brand 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and they start to overstate the importance of the brand in the life of the consumer. Customers don't care what your brand thinks about the death of the Queen or about coronavirus or a host of other political issues which you think it's crucial you have a point of view on, and the customer doesn't give a fuck. Yeah? You're just toothpaste. Yeah? Stay in your lane. Yeah? And it's a crucial overstatement on many brands' part. What happens when we understand that brands are little things is many things start to change that should change. We start to realize the importance of salience, right? So salience is easily the most important concept, again, of the last 3 or 4 years, right? And all we mean by salience is, does the brand come to mind? Yeah, buying situations, does the brand come to mind? We'll talk about it more later. It's the big driver of most things. You don't realize you haven't got much salience if you don't realize your brand is a little thing. Because if you think your brand is a big thing, well, our customer thinks about our brand all the time, as often as we do. No, they don't. So salience becomes more important. And what we're seeing is a failure of market orientation, of seeing the world from the customer point of view. We're seeing our brand as being mega important to everyone. If we just turned it around and looked at it through the eyes of the customer, we'd realize the customer doesn't care. There's a very famous planner at Adam Eve called Sarah Carter. She might be the best advertising planner in the world right now. And she's a brilliant thinker, Sarah. And one of the smartest things she ever said is, every person that works in advertising should have a Post-it note on their desk. And the Post-it note should say, consumers don't give a shit. Yeah? And she's right. She's absolutely right. Remember that customers don't care should be our first starting point. Yeah? And that's not a negative thought, it's a realistic thought. Yeah? Because when you understand customers don't care and brands are little things, you start to realize 90% of the time why purpose is absolute nonsense. We'll come back to that. We get much more simple in our strategies because we start to realize we don't have 400 brain cells to play with for our brand. And in my experience, better brand management emerges once we realize our brand is a little unimportant thing. Yeah? We start to manage it better. All right. Number 8, BrewDog's anti-sponsorship. So as you probably know, BrewDog is a Scottish independent brewery, which is a very specific point of view, very specific tone of voice. It's independent. It's a little bit annoying. It's a little bit disruptive. And they've taken aim at the FIFA World Cup, which, as we all know, really doesn't make any sense, right? On arguments of bribery, slave labor, the LGBTQ community, pretty much everything. Environmentally, you couldn't have invented a more horrendous idea, right? But we've all sort of gone along with it. So BrewDog decided to become the anti-sponsor of the FIFA World Cup. And they brewed a beer called Lost, and they've run these really rather fetching outdoor ads, essentially saying, we're against the World Cup. And they've done, as usual, a pretty good job, right? This is a particularly striking one. And also this one. Now, what's happened in the marketing community is very interesting, yeah? Because although they're making a very worthy point about how FIFA and the World Cup is indeed a pretty despicable situation, marketing people have made the comment that actually BrewDog aren't doing this particularly well. For starters, although they claim to be the anti-FIFA sponsor, they are showing the World Cup games in their BrewDog pubs. In fact, BrewDog is exporting its beer to Qatar, even though it is an anti-Qatari sponsor. And it will even be served during World Cup games over there. And BrewDog has its own problems, actually, as you may remember. Their own CEO's got into trouble by treating his employees badly. I mean, he's not throwing them from the top of stadia, but he's not been the perfect employer, shall we say, right? So a lot of people have said, well, this is bullshit because you're not really walking the walk. And we've got lots of articles saying craft brewery faces backlash, being disingenuous, and the hypocrisy. And the argument is this is going to hurt them. It's not going to hurt them. And I think BrewDog are much smarter than most other companies, right? I think we're outdated in our thoughts about brand, okay? one of the great books of brand management, the first great book, was David Arker's Managing Brand Equity. And the idea at the heart of the book is we have brand awareness, gateway variable, and then we have brand image. And the brand image is the most important thing. But that book was published 30 years ago. Yeah, it's a long, long time. We are now, I think, much closer to the world of Ehrenberg Bass and Byron Sharp, and the idea that salience is pretty much the only thing you have to worry about. Brands, again, are little things. And without salience, we have nothing. Salience, I would argue, if you wanted a bullshit figure, bringing the brand to mind over and over again is 75% of the branding job these days, irrespective of the 25% of image that follows. So what I'm really saying is BrewDog have got it right, because when I was teaching it a long, long time ago, we had awareness as a gateway variable, kind of like a bouncer, yeah? And then you got into the consumer world, you can form a relationship with the consumer, and you could have loyalty and lots of anthropomorphic things. This is not how it works, and it was always wrong. Instead, we live in a very different world, a system 1, system 2 world. System 1 is the reptile brain, yeah? The unconscious. You probably came on the way here today at some point to a coffee shop, and you went to get a coffee, and the barista said, "What kind of coffee do you want?" And you said, "Flat white." You have no idea where that flat white came from, yeah? In your head, it just popped into your head. That's system 1, yeah? The reptile brain. If I did research on you, qual or quant, you would then explain your flat white choice with a whole bunch of horseshit that you actually believe about your mother and growing up in Somerset and other shit, right? You think that's true, but it's not true. It's a system 2 explanation, rationalization, for a system 1 salient-driven thought, yeah? The better analogy is system 1 is kind of a crazy president just coming up with ideas, and then system 2 is the White House spokesperson that has to explain and rationalize the decisions post hoc, yeah? Salience is far more important than we realize. BrewDog get it, right? It doesn't matter that they're serving the beer. People are noticing those billboards and talking about them, and that's the key point. So, it's obviously best to have salience and brand image, but in many cases you can't. So you should prioritize salience, presence, coming to mind, yeah? And maintain it because it fades quickly. To brand managers, I'm saying trade some of your class, trade some of your taste, trade some of your attempts to be on position for lots and lots of salience. And I speak to you with some expertise, right? I have been columnist of the year in the UK several times, and many of my columns feature things like a giant picture of my ass, which is one of my most famous columns, right? I actually had a picture of my ass, and it's a long story, but it was on the front cover of Marketing Week for about 4 very long days, right? It's tasteless and it's crude, right? But by fuck, it worked. It worked. When Ritson's got his ass in his column this week, right? You see my point? You trade a little bit of class. You trade a little bit of doing it the right way. You know, I'll tell you a good story off the record, although we're on camera, but yeah, I can tell you. I was doing some work with Tourism Australia last week, a week before, and they got approached by I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and the TV show wanted to do the program back in Australia. And the team at Tourism Australia are very good. We're like, it's not really on brand for our Australia, right? But it gets people thinking about Australia. And in the end, as you know, they took the offer, and I'm a Celebrity is now based back in Australia. That's a good brand choice. It's not on brand. It's against brand, really. But it ensures salience, and it's the right choice because salience über alles. So don't let consistency hold you back. Brands are not as vulnerable as you might think. I think that's, again, another lesson of the last few years. They can take a bit of a kicking, and they need a lot of light. This is the great Les Binet. Les has got a very long career, 40 years now, and he said many times he's seen a lot of shit advertising, but he's never seen an ad ever damage a brand. It's a myth. It doesn't happen, yeah? Brands are stronger than we think. There's a new bit of research this month in the Journal of Marketing looking at what happens when you show someone a positive review. I don't know why this is for the Cleveland Browns merchandise. Purchase intent is strong when you see a good review online. When you see a negative review online, no surprise, purchase intent goes down. But if the person who's making the decision finds out that the person giving the 1 star isn't like them, they're not a true Browns fan or they're somehow different, they can rationalize it and purchase intent increases 27 points over the 5-star review. Now, it's a weird finding, right? But it's back to this same point. Salience, presenting the product, right, is more important than this sensitive little image that I think we told ourselves was so important. All right, number 7, Tick-tockification. I think I made this word up, but as a columnist for 20-odd years, I've done this before and said, I made that word up, and then some asshole from Estonia wrote it in his diary and then says, no, you didn't, right? So I probably made it up all at the same time as someone else. So if you look at how long it takes to get 1 billion users for a platform, Facebook set the record just over 8 years. Then both YouTube and WhatsApp only took 7 years. Instagram took slightly longer. TikTok's only taken 5 years to get to 1 billion, yeah? Which is remarkably fast. And so there it sits with 1 billion users at the start of this calendar year. But of course, with that trajectory, who knows where it will go? And it gets worse, because as we know, whatever chart you look at, TikTok users spend more time on TikTok than any other social platform. It's off the charts, right? You combine these two things together, growth of user base and the amount of time users spend on this platform. And a third thing, which is it's the most ad-friendly platform of all. You can drop ads into TikTok, people won't even notice, right? And you've got a recipe for advertising success. Giant exponential growth expected, yeah, over the next few years. Now, the existing incumbent social media platforms are crapping themselves. They're crapping themselves because two things are being squeezed here. First of all, advertising revenues. There's a limited amount of money to be spent on digital media. There is a limit to it. And as TikTok grows, it's going to be sucking the money out of the other platforms. And the other thing that's being squeezed is user time. It's not all incremental anymore. If TikTok keeps pulling so many people and so much of their time, it's going to come from the other platforms and make Facebook's situation even worse. So the combination of these two things means the other platforms are worried. How have the other platforms responded to the threat of TikTok, right? They've all responded in the same way. We're going to do more video. We're going to do more full screen video. We're going to do more full screen short 60-second video, and it's going to be driven by an algorithm. Never mind that we're, in Instagram's case, not a video site and not about algorithms or a social media site. Fuck that. No, from now on, we're going to do this. And to prove how generic and stupid they are, I'd like to play a little game of spot the difference, okay? I've randomly assorted the 4 different platforms. These are actual screen grabs. And I would like you to identify which one is which, okay? You have 1 minute to identify these 5 social media sites. Off you go. I haven't altered or removed anything. This is exactly how they look. Okay, let me give you the answers. A is TikTok. C is Instagram. B is Facebook. E is Snapchat. And D is YouTube. No. But you see my point. You have no idea. I might just be lying to you. You wouldn't know the difference, right? It's so bad, even the Kardashians had to send a message to Instagram saying, make Instagram again. Stop trying to be TikTok. I just want to see cute photos of my friends. Not only are the Kardashians right, Instagram actually listened to this shit and changed their strategy as a result of it, right? That's how generic and stupid Instagram's response was. An even better story is, this is Mark Wheeler, who runs Google and YouTube in Australia. He's a mate of mine. And we were doing a thing together about 3 months ago, and we were putting makeup on. I don't know what the hell it was, but it was some kind of weird TV thing. And we're sat in these chairs together putting makeup on, and we're just chatting away. And I said, hey, it's amazing. I was on YouTube last night, and somehow TikTok took me off YouTube and got me onto TikTok. And he literally had a moment, like I had a sort of small stroke for a second. He's like, what? How did they do that? And I'm like, I don't know, but they got me off. So he gets on the phone to his team, like blah, 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 blah. And then he comes back and says, Mark, did you know, can I show you something? Is this it? I went, yeah, that's exactly it. He said, no, that's our product, Google Shorts, which looks exactly like TikTok. And so, and I'm an idiot, obviously, I'm a digital idiot. I know I'm my thumbs everywhere. But I thought I'd been moved on to TikTok, right? It looks so much like TikTok. You see what I mean? Everyone looks the same. So you see what's about to happen, right? Roger Martin, the greatest strategy thinker of all time, always says, when brands try and do the same thing at the same time to the same customers, you're going to get commercial bloodbaths. And you can see why these companies are all doing the same thing. The greatest concept ever invented is the concept of core competence. Companies get good at some shit, and as a result, they can't do other shit. That sounds simple, but it explains a large amount of the corporate world. These companies were all disruptors. But being a disruptor does not mean you can then defend against disruption. That's a totally different skill. Yeah? This is Lucy Bonza. She's a fantastic footballer. She scores a lot of goals. Put her in the nets, put her as a goalkeeper, she'd be useless, right? Scoring goals doesn't mean you're able to stop them. By the same token, being a disruptor doesn't mean you can prevent others from disrupting you. These companies are no good at defense because they've been on offense for the last 15 years. And finally, that leads to Clayton Christensen's point about disruptive technologies. That's what's about to happen. TikTok's about to disrupt social media like we've never seen before. Now, something then weird happens, right? So I wrote the article, and Roger Martin, who's one of my heroes, sent me a message saying, that's a great article. And I was so touched by his message, I did something I never do. I reread the article where I wrote this, and I completely disagreed with myself. So in my article, what I'm saying is, this is the explanation, right? These brands are no good at defending. They're going to get disruptive. They're stupid. But I don't think they are. I had another thought. This is Keith Cratch. He's 72 years old. He's an ex-congressman, and he has great hair. He's a Republican, and he's part now of a giant lobbying army that is attempting to get TikTok banned from the United States. We should duplicate what we did with Huawei and ZTE and not let them in, he said recently. Crack wants to use the same playbook to ban TikTok. So, what's really going on here? Has anyone worked it out? Why are the 4 incumbent social media brands all building TikTok clones? Is it because they're stupid, or is something else about to happen? What's really going on? Anyone worked it out? What are they doing? Yeah, they're supplying him with hundreds or tens of millions of dollars. They're pretty confident TikTok will be banned because of its links to China, and they're preparing themselves for the market once TikTok is removed. I think they know something that we don't know. Now, I don't want to be Scott Galloway, but if I could predict one thing for the coming calendar year, I'd suggest that we're looking at a TikTok ban being probable to very likely. All right, on to number 6. Airbnb goes long. Very interesting, very famous case study this year. So Airbnb's been doing short advertising for a very long time. Google search advertising, spending hundreds of millions of dollars on stuff like this. And then this year, last year, and even going back to 2019, they started doing something different. Dave Stevenson, their CFO, said in 2019, before the pandemic, we shifted our marketing strategy to be more brand-driven and even less dependent on search engine marketing. We've made that shift, and it has proven to have been the right shift, not only in 19, but in 20 and 21. So a lot of money has gone from this performance marketing to stuff like this instead. I don't think it's that good an ad, frankly, but it illustrates a classic example of long brand building. Now remember, the great theory of our time of marketing is the long and the short. Field and Burnett looked at hundreds of case studies and looked at growth over time. And what they discovered were two different trajectories, right? A short one, where we spend a little bit of money and sales go woo, and then drop back down again when we stop spending, and a longer, more incremental line, brand building, that takes 2 or 3 years. Don't see these two things as the opposite or competitors. The most important word here is and, the long and the short. The long sets up the short pays for the long. And if you get the right combination, you start to make a lot more money. The problem is, of course, it takes 2, 3, 4 years before the long properly works and sets up the short. And no company looks at the world from a 2, 3, 4 year window. They're all trapped in a 12-month window. And when you're trapped in a 12-month planning window and you look at the long and the short, the long doesn't make much sense because it doesn't give you that much ROI. So what you end up doing, or what most companies do, is they dump all their money into performance, targeted, more digital communications because it gives them a better ROI. And of course, another year comes and they do it again and again forever. It's Groundhog Day in most companies, right? Ironically, they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars because of their chase for ROI. What we're seeing now, though, are more and more companies realizing that the long of it isn't just necessary, but probably is the main driver. Let me give you another example. This is a better ad. This is Coca-Cola's new Christmas campaign for 2022. It is their campaign for this year, but it's also a 15-year-old ad. Coke this year have decided to stop making shit new ads and just use their old ad because it tests way better than all of their new ads. And they know that because they use a wonderful company called System 1. And System 1 tests every ad on 3 things. How much does it build the brand in the long term? A star rating. How much does it drive short-term sales? A spike rating. And how much does it have fluency? How much is it attributed to brand? Remember, 85% of ads, consumers don't associate with the brand that's sponsoring it. So how much does it link to the brand? Well, System 1 can put these things on a short-term axis and a long-term axis. And they can tell Coke, you've got an ad that's good at both. And in fact, because they measure every single ad in the UK, they can do it for more than 5,000 ads in 2022. This is what the picture currently looks like. And it tells us something really interesting that we're only just beginning to understand. So if I look at the spike rating, how much short-term power do these campaigns have? I could divide them into above average short-term, driving short-term sales, and below average, bad at short-term sales. If I do that, an interesting picture emerges if I look at the 4s and the 5s, the really strong campaigns that build brand. Because look at their ability not just to build brand, but also do long and short. Most of those ads, 3/4 of them, that are good at building brand are also very good at selling short-term product. The long drives the short. Very few of them are good at brand building, but aren't good at selling short-term product as well. So we can conclude that doing the long well, doing good brand building, will also deliver on the short. That's why Coke is doing this. That ad is going to sell a shit ton of Coke for Christmas, and it does a great job of building the brand. Is the opposite true? Do campaigns that are good at selling short-term products also good at building brand? Well, let's have a look. If it was, we would see all the campaigns that are good at driving short-term sales also being very good at driving brands. But that isn't what we see. Look at the distribution. Most of the ads that are good at short-term sales penetration, performance, are actually pretty lousy at building brand. These kinds of campaigns are super important because they sell truckloads of stuff. They're how companies make money. But they do not build your brand for you. So we can conclude, no, doing the short, doing performance marketing is essential, but it doesn't deliver on your brand. Yeah? The long drives the short, but the short doesn't really drive the brand. And that gives us a couple of key lessons. Yeah? It's not the 60-40 rule. It varies depending on your context. And it's not brand versus performance. It's brand and performance. But they are connected, but they're also different. Very different paradigms. Long delivers some short, but short does less for the long. And what that means is you've got to do that kind of short targeted performance marketing, but you have to have a separate budget also for the long. Yeah? Because without it, you're going to end up sub-performing because ROI sucks you into that short-term world where you actually, ironically, eventually make less money. And interestingly, Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, recently said, we think of performance marketing as more of a way to laser in to balance supply and demand rather than a way to just purchase a large amount of customers. This is how we should use the short. Entrepreneurially to sell product to a particular segment at a particular time. Nothing wrong with that. But we have to balance it with long-term brand building as well. Okay, getting to our big ones now. Number 5, extrapolation errors. So I'm old now. I think I've discovered that more than ever here. I keep learning. I've been here for 35 years ago. So when coronavirus arrived, March of that year, I knew what was going to happen. And I also decided I was going to sort of call it out before it happened. So when I did all my talks about marketing and coronavirus, one of the things I talked about is a whole bunch of idiots are going to turn up and tell you that coronavirus is going to change marketing forever and everything is going to change forever. And I got ahead of them all and went, they're going to come, watch, they'll arrive. And then Martin Lindstrom turned up. Now, Martin Lindstrom is a very famous brand guru based in America. He's written a lot of books, 3 times more books than Tolstoy. That's how clever he is, right? And he has a new book called Biology for a Coronavirus World, yeah? And I did say some pretty rough things about Martin Lindstrom in a variety of articles, which led him to try and sue me. One of the great things about being a columnist is he can't actually sue me. He has to sue my magazine. I have no liability, so I don't care. My editor loses his shit, but I don't care. I said one of the things that kept me sane during coronavirus was reading Martin Lindstrom's articles because he talks such utter bollocks, right? I called him a catastrophe monkey because he was saying the world's going to, end forever. And I said, marketers are obsessed with the pornography of change, and Martin Lindstrom is the Larry Flint of the pornography of change. But look at the kind of shit he's been writing, yeah? This change, coronavirus, is so profound that one can talk about a global synchronization of human behavior, establishing a completely new universal change of consumer patterns, right? It's horseshit, right? Here's another one. When it comes to malls, stores, shopping, and entertainment, coronavirus can be counted on to escalate the replacement of conventional brick and mortar models with digital. Old industries will collapse as the space they dominated is completely redefined, right? Completely losing his shit, right? So he's totally wrong, right? He looked right for about a year or so during coronavirus, but he's totally wrong. And now we're through, I can demonstrate how wrong he is. So I have hundreds of charts like this. Here's just 2. This is the US data on internet sales as a proportion of total retail sales, okay? Here we are back in 2006, it's very low, it's gradually increasing. Now, here comes the coronavirus phase, and here's what's gonna happen to that figure. Look at it go. It's almost gonna double, okay? Now, if you're Martin Lindstrom, you think that's because it's a total paradigmatic change in everything that's ever happened, right? If you're me, you're gonna go, people are locked in their fucking houses. They have to use the internet to buy stuff for a while, okay? And what's going to happen is we're going to revert back to that mean. We're not going to go back to where we were in 2018. We'll go back to where we would have been if coronavirus hadn't happened on the same trend line, which, of course, is exactly what has happened, yeah? Now, I call that the boring brown line of continuity, yeah? It is boring, okay? It's not interesting. We had a fucking crazy time, coronavirus. We're back to pretty much where we would be. No one's going to buy a book about that, yeah? Someone's going to buy biology, everything's going to fucking change, read about it in my new book. No one's going to buy things are pretty much going back to normal again, right? But there's a serious point, right? The pornography of change agents are the loudest voices because they're selling shit. There's nothing to sell here. It'll go back to normal. It's not a sexy, marketable view. Here's UK cinema box office. Again, when we get into 2020, what do you know? Coronavirus strikes, and sure enough, box office disappears. Because you can't go outside and sit in a dark room with people, right? Again, if you're Martin Lindstrom, cinema's over forever, right? Except it's not. This year through to September, it's pretty much back to where it was pre-coronavirus. And we're not even apart from Tom Cruise, no one's making any movies yet, right? The boring brown line of continuity, yeah, keeps kicking in. Now, here's an interesting point. Remember when Netflix got into loads of trouble at the start of this year because apparently they were losing subscribers? Yeah, management had predicted they were going to gain 2.5 million subscribers, and in fact, they lost 200,000. Do you know why? Because if you are, again, going to extrapolate from that period where we were all locked down and everyone was getting loads and loads of Netflix, then yeah, you're about to do a huge number. But if you were to extrapolate off where you were pre-coronavirus, the number's a lot less. And the difference between those two numbers is about 3 million subscribers. I think Netflix just made a stupid error and extrapolated off their coronavirus base rather than their long-term base and paid the price for being greedy or stupid as a result. Okay, moving on. Here we go. We're getting to the goals on now. Number 4, Patagonia sells out. So this is a really wonderful but also really important moment. So this is Yvon Chouinard. He's the very miserable-looking owner and founder of Patagonia. And as you probably know, earlier this year, he basically gave the company away. It's worth about $3 billion, and he put it into a trust, which all profits now will help fight climate change. Because the US government is fundamentally bastards, he also had to pay tax on that gift, right? That's why it looks so miserable, right? Instead of going public, you could say we're going purpose, said Chouinard. It's a beautiful and wonderful thing to do, right? So his family lose $3 billion and they have to pay tax on it as well. Now this is Bill Bernbach, who said many famous things about advertising. But one of his less well-known quotes is, a principle isn't a principle until it costs you something. I think we could apply Bernbach's quote exactly to brand purpose, yeah? Brand purpose isn't brand purpose unless we're doing it because we believe in it and it costs us something. Except that's not how we feel about brand purpose in marketing. If you noticed, we have a different, special kind of brand purpose, yeah? Not only does it not cost us anything, our version of brand purpose makes us money, yeah? Which I would argue proves that it's not purpose, it's horseshit, yeah? All these companies saying, and because of brand purpose, we're growing more, getting more sales, charging more money. That's not how this works, you morons, yeah? Purpose, as Chouinard demonstrates, costs you things. In fact, it often costs you everything, and you don't care because you're doing it for the purpose, not for the money. During Black Friday, for example, Patagonia famously said, please don't buy anything just because it's all on sale. And if you do, we'll donate all the money to charity because we don't believe you need to go out and do that. That cost them tens of millions of dollars. But that's okay because that's their purpose. And I invented a phrase which I'm very proud of. And I did invent this one. The purpose of purpose is purpose. Yeah? When we follow a purpose, we do it because we believe in the purpose. And it probably will cost us money and people and products and time. Now, purpose is an effective brand strategy in some cases. But like any strategy, it has to be a choice. It doesn't work for every brand. These people selling brand purpose, saying, if you don't have purpose, you'll fail, that's bullshit. It doesn't work that way. It may work for some brands and not for others. But unlike most strategies, purpose is probably going to cost you rather than make you money. And you need to be cool with that because it's purpose. Now, linked to that, Unilever gets less purposeful. This is probably as big a story as you'll ever get. So, Unilever is a fine company. This story goes back a little bit. So, in 2018, I'm sat on a plane somewhere. I can't remember where I was. It was pre-COVID. All I remember is I read this LinkedIn post about the brand manager is dead, long live the brand activist. It was the usual horseshit, right? But when I finished reading the nonsense, I looked at who had written it, and it was Hanneke Faber, who at the time was the head of Unilever for Europe, probably one of the top 3 most important marketers on the planet. And I was so shocked that someone that senior would say that I actually spilled my gin and tonic into my groin, right? What was she saying? Purpose, she said, comes first today. The days of managing brands are behind us. I don't get that. The role of the brand manager now becomes brand activist. She has more than 1,000 brand managers reporting to her when she writes this, yeah? And my father would now be proud of me, yeah? At what point did we get to the place where selling good products, satisfying customers, making a profit is something that we can't be proud of, yeah? We don't have to do bad things to the planet, yeah? We can do all of that and also be proud of the capitalist enterprise. Now, let's be clear, Unilever are genuine, and Faber's genuine about this purpose, but they're wrong and they're naive. The implication that non-purpose will fail is nonsense. The dodgy causality they use to say all of our fastest growing brands have purpose. Yeah? Ergo, purpose makes you grow faster. That's one explanation. The other one is you picked your fastest growing brands and you gave them all brand purpose. I wonder which one it was. And the rules of brand architecture have not changed. And I'm amazed Unilever, a great company, have forgotten this, right? So when you're a house of brands, or in this case, an endorsed house of brands, you have a portfolio of 20 or 30 brands, and each one must be allowed to do its own thing. There are brands in Unilever's portfolio, Ben & Jerry, Dove, where purpose works beautifully and helps the brand and has a very natural fit. There are other brands in Unilever's portfolio, for example, Hellmann's Mayonnaise, pot noodle, where there's no fucking purpose, yeah? Literally no purpose, yeah? I wrote once an article saying, there's probably some poor fucker trying to work out what the brand purpose of pot noodle is, and he wrote to me and said, it's me, yeah? It's me. This is madness. It's madness, yeah? The reason you're going to buy Hellmann's Mayonnaise is to reduce the food mountain. Good fucking look at that. Good luck with that strategy in Morecambe next Tuesday with Mrs. Jones, who's worried about her fuel bills, right? Yeah, I'll trade up for mayonnaise, Hellmann's Mayonnaise, because I want to reduce the food mountain, right? It's not going to work. It wouldn't work before the recession. It definitely won't work now. And it takes us to the quote of the year, right? Terry Smith runs a giant, he's a shark. He runs a giant investment trust that has hundreds of millions of dollars of exposure to Unilever. And he said earlier this year, a company which feels it has to define the purpose of Hellmann's Mayonnaise has, in our view, clearly lost the plot. The Hellmann's brand has existed since 1913. So we would guess that by now consumers have figured out its purpose. Spoiler alert, salads and sandwiches, yeah? He's a very influential thinker. And also, I think he might be right. And as we go into a recession, he's even more right. We got away with purpose in the indolent 10 years that came after GFC. It was an indulgence. Now we're into a recession. Private label will grow, and this nonsense will quickly, very quickly, prove disastrous, as Unilever's share price clearly demonstrates. When you benchmark it against the other FMCG stocks, what you discover is it's having a hell of a time, which is why Joe, the CEO, has announced he's gone. The purpose project has not worked on any level. And now what we're seeing are all the executives that pushed purpose to us for 5 years are backtracking very, very quickly. Mark Pritchard, the most important marketer in the world, who runs Procter & Gamble's marketing, who's had his own fair share of nonsense. Look at what he did to Gillette with that stupid purpose, has now said the industry in general has just gone too far into the good and potentially not paying enough attention to growth. And he came out with a statement about 4 years ago saying P&G will be a force for good and a force for growth. At Cannes this year, he announced, actually, we're going to reverse that priority. Growth has to come first. And even Hanneke Faber has been clearly told to start watering it down. She told the FT, but purpose is only the icing on the cake. It's not the cake itself, yeah? It's a change. It's a readjustment in how things are. All right, down to the last two. You ready? Number 2, Russian brand exodus. Having given purpose a load of shit, let's give it some credit. The evil that is Russia, Putin's Russia, and what they're doing to the wonderful people of the Ukraine is an abomination. What Ursula von der Leyen has said, we stand by Ukraine and we'll make the Russians pay for their cruelty, is brilliant. She's been a very good leader in this. But there's a real problem. The Russian people don't have access to free and open media. They might not know how much the world condemns them because Putin is running essentially a propaganda-based state. So the fact that more than 1,000 big Western brands have pulled out of Russia completely is a brilliant thing. Yeah. And it sends, I've spent a lot of time in Moscow over the years. They love their shopping and they love their brands probably more than any other city I've ever been to. Losing almost every single brand sends them a very clear signal that Putin cannot disguise. And it's a wonderful thing. And also a shout out to Yale School of Management and their dean, because Yale did something brilliant this year. They set up a proper, objectively run list of the brands that were in and out of Russia. And it gave us leverage over the brands that were still staying in there so we could write about them. So let's spend a moment just vilifying these fuckers because they're the brands that continue to trade in Russia. I'm a big Lacoste man. I have a lot of Lacoste shirts, right? I can't bring myself to get rid of them, but I can't wear them and I certainly won't buy another one again, right? These are evil companies. By not pulling out, de facto, you're showing your support for Putin and all that's bad in the world. But it also creates an amazing brand issue that we don't talk about much at the moment. So these brands, brave brands, I've got a couple of big clients. I know what it's cost those big clients to pull out of Russia, and it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds each year. It's a genuine purpose-based sacrifice. McDonald's is a huge brand in Russia. It's amazing that they've pulled out. But when they pulled out, they created a vacuum. And famously, the speaker at the Duma said, we don't need McDonald's. Yeah, we can have a Duma burger or a Lenin burger or whatever this might be. So they now have their own version of McDonald's. When IKEA pulled out, a new version of IKEA has emerged. Starbucks has been replaced with Starducks. And my favorite is Kentucky Fried Chicken has now become CFC, Crimea Fried Chicken. Now, these wouldn't survive in the international world because they're obviously knockoffs. But Russia is a failed state. It's not part of the world community anymore. So they've all been officially licensed by the Russian government. These are legal entities now. These are allowed to happen. And it throws up a fantastic question of what happens if and when the wars with Russia end, what we're going to do about shit like this. Okay, our final one. Stagflation marketing. It's the massive theme of this year, and it'll be the massive theme of next year as well. So this is Ian McLeod. He's a relatively anonymous now, unknown Conservative MP, but he invented the term stagflation. Stagnation or recession of the economy, inflation of prices happening at the same time. And because we've got inflation, we have one challenge, which is to increase price. And because we also have a recession, we've also got the challenge of maintaining ad spend. The two crucial challenges for this year and the year ahead. So to understand the first one, which is how do we maintain advertising budgets in a recession, you first have to understand the concept of excess share of voice. One of the great laws of marketing, yeah? So back to J.P. Jones. In 1990, we discovered this incredible relationship between a brand's share of voice and a brand's share of market. Yeah? They're almost one-to-one. There's a little curve at the bottom and the top, but essentially there's an equilibrium. When we talk about excess share of voice, we're talking about what happens if I subtract share of voice from share of market, okay? So let's take an example. Here's a brand with 10% share of voice and about 10% share of market. It therefore has an excess share of voice of 0 because, trust me on this, 10 minus 10 is 0, yeah? It's on the equilibrium. But what happens if that brand gets ambitious? What happens if it doubles its ad spend? Well, now we have an excess share of voice of 10 because 20 minus 10 is plus 10. That's important because over time, what's going to happen is that brand will again come towards the equilibrium. It will, over time, pick up market share and grow. The reverse is also true. If a brand cuts its ad spend, it gets a negative share of voice. 10% share of voice, 20% market share. And over time, yes, it will lose market share. And this is, for my money, the only true law of marketing. Everyone's looked at this and everyone's found the same thing. It applies. Why am I talking about it with respect to the recession? Well, this is the theory upon which recessionary advertising is built. So let's say you're a brand with a $50 million advertising budget. And let's say we go into a giant recession. And let's say all the other brands in the category cut 50% of their ad spend, which is probably in many cases realistic. Well, suddenly, you've got yourself an excess share of voice. Not by increasing your own budget, but because everyone else has cut it back. Your relative share of voice has gone up. The equilibrium and the rules of ESOV still apply. You will grow because you've got excess share of voice. And we've been looking at categories and recessions literally for 100 years. And it really does apply. Remember too that extra money will go further because in a recession, your money goes further because there's more media per dollar. For 100 years, we've looked at recessions and we've seen the same thing over and over again. Roland Vail in the Harvard Business Review. If you look at brands that either maintained or increased advertising during the recession, they don't do that much better than the other brands in the recession itself. But when the recession ends and growth comes, these brands boom out of the recession. Same was true in 74, 75. The brands that did not cut their advertising boom out of the recession. The same was true 1990, 91. The brands that maintained their advertising spend boomed out of that recession because they already had excess share of voice. And the same is true during the GFC. Any brand that had more than 8% excess share of voice gained 4.5 points of annual market share growth in the immediate years after the GFC. You're building up excess share of voice, which is kicking into gear. Ironically, the reason you maintain your ad spend during a recession is not the recession, is not even customers. It's because some of your competitors will pull back and they will give you a relative advantage, which will see you grow in the years to come. Mixed to that, you're going to have to manage price rises. We talked about Musk at the start. Let's talk about a brand that gets it right, where a marketer, a very good marketer, is in charge of pricing as well. So, as you may know, we got a Pret a Manger in Lancaster yet? Yeah, fucking hell. Only 15 years to go. Anyway, so Pret a Manger does a great deal called an endless coffee deal, right? You pay 20 quid a month. You can drink as many coffees as you want in any Pret around anywhere, well, apart from Lancaster because they're out there, right? Except with inflation at 10%, that's not justifiable for long. You're going to have to do something about it because it's getting more and more expensive. So Pret decided they would go from 20 quid a month to 25 quid a month. Now, it just so happens we have a marketer at Pret a Manger that knows how to do pricing. And she knows the theory of pricing. And it's a very simple playbook, but it's a very important one. The first thing you know about price increases is introduce it with notice. Don't spring a price increase on your customers like ninjas coming out of trees, yeah? Tell them it's coming. It makes sense to do that. Second, call it a price increase. There's great research that says don't use euphemisms. Don't say, the good news is we're introducing a whole new way for you to give us margin, right? It's an opportunity to spend more money with us, right? Call it what it is, which is a price increase. Explain the increase in consumer terms. Explain why we're doing this and where the money is going to go. And finally, still remind them at the new price what great value the product is still offering. So this is the letter that Pret a Manger sent everyone that was registered for their coffee club. It's literally textbook, right? So, explaining the price rise in consumer terms. She actually breaks out the 5 quid extra and then explains where all the quids are going to go in terms of VAT and paying staff more and everything else. Brilliant. This goes out at the end of January, giving people 6 weeks notice that it's going to happen. She calls it a price increase. And right at the end there, she says, hey, this is still a very, very good price increase. So a very, very good value offer. Yeah? Textbook approach. The one warning here, though, even though you're successful with your price increase, don't celebrate it. Because sure enough, as soon as Pret did this, the Guardian ran a story saying, Pret, what a bunch of bastards. They put their prices up at the very time where consumers have no money. This company's put their prices up. Pret are doing the right thing, but no one in the media will understand. And remember, you're going to lose some people. You're always going to lose some people when you change price. This is Carol. She's obviously having a hard day. She's tweeted, Pret, I've been contemplating cancelling subscription due to the bitter and not nice coffee I've experienced over the past 2 weeks. Well, as predicted, you're raising the price by £5. Not paying more for poor coffee, so I'm off, right? Don't let these individual messages from customers put you off, right? Social media is not representative of the market, yeah? It's not even representative of Carol, who I'll bet once she sobers up, she's probably still a member of the coffee club, right? And remember, with the price increase, we lose a few customers, yeah? but the marginal advantage of the higher price is always worthwhile. So here we go. You ready? Our top 10 marketing moments. At 10, Twitter's stupid pricing. At 9, brands mourning the death of the Queen. 8, BrewDog demonstrating empty salience. 7, Tick-tockification. 6, Airbnb goes long with its brand spend. 5, extrapolation errors and catastrophe monkeys. Patagonia giveaway and the purpose of purpose is purpose. Number 3, Unilever finally puts purpose second. Number 2, Russian brand exodus. And number 1, double stagflation challenge. This is my top 10 for 2022, and it just leaves me to wish you a Merry Marketing Christmas.
Well, thank you so much for that. That was wonderful.
Pleasure.
I really enjoyed hearing language I don't hear very often.
And the dildo ad.
Yeah, the dildo ad and the word profit is absolutely marvelous. What I want to do now is to open up the questions to the floor, and I'm sure there's going to be some. We've got lovely ladies with mics here, Thomas.
And we can broaden it out. Top 10 or other things, whatever you'd like to talk about before we go for drinks.
Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
I'm going
Big
to, in
fan for a
advance,
long
I'm going to
time.
refer to everyone as Sir and Madam, right? I'm always confused what I should say. So I know, is that right? What do we say? What's the politically, what do we do now?
You can call me sir, yeah, no problem.
I'll call you Sir.
So what
there
I
you go.
wanted to
It's
say is-
Sir or Madam. Sir or Madam.
That was lovely. Thank you very much. A lot of turkey for this Christmas. What was the 11th that you left out last minute? And you
Kanye.
decided to take out.
Kanye. So we had a big debate about Kanye because there's a lesson there a little bit. I mean, it's a big news thing, but what do we learn? We learn with Kanye that it's not just a sponsorship, right? He was involved in, they had 200 employees on the Ye sub-brand, and he got so deep into it's a risk to have any sponsor, celebrity endorser. But when you start building products and stores around a celebrity, the risk factor goes up. So that was number 11. It just didn't feel like it was as big a thing as the other options, though. So Kanye got kicked out. And also, I presented this in America last week, and I just didn't want to get into it with Americans. I just didn't want to open that door. Do you know what I mean? Any further than it's already open. Sir at the back.
Thanks.
Or madam, I'm not going yet.
Depends what day it is.
Yeah, there we go.
So we were talking a little bit about BrewDog and Qatar.
Yes.
And I don't know if they did actually run those out-of-home ads. I really hope they didn't.
No, they really did.
Did they?
There's a common thing saying they didn't even run the ads. They did run the ads. Not a lot. But, they amplified them through social, but they are legit billboards.
Okay, that feels better then. But the question I have is, obviously we were talking about the impacts the anti-sponsorship would have on their brands. And then when we were discussing Unilever, you mentioned, but Gillette with their ads.
Yes.
How you're glad the CEO's moved away from purpose.
Yes.
So I think the point you made was, brands aren't as vulnerable as we think.
Yes.
But in Gillette's case, clearly something there was a bit different. And what are your thoughts on that?
It's a very good question. And I'm not quite sure of the answer, but I'm sure that it's a good question and there is a thing there. I think I'd summarize it as we often say there's no such thing as bad publicity. Well, there is. It's called bad publicity, right? But it is really, really difficult, back to Les Binet's point, to actually have bad publicity because of this salience thing. If, however, you truly go to the center of your brand with the core of your market and do something really stupid, and if you remember the Gillette campaign we're talking about, Gillette is quite a conservative brand with quite an old conservative user base, okay? They attracted that user base with a message which was Gillette, the best a man can get. Masculinity, everything's great. Men are great, men are wonderful. And then they produced this remarkable ad, which was basically, men, you're fucking terrible and you're to blame for everything. And I'm paraphrasing, but not much, right? You should feel guilty for what you're doing, men. Get better, right? I think that was the only example I can think of. And again, it's hard to get the data out of P&G. But the clue is in every country where they ran that ad, they then moved back to, in Australia, they moved back to firemen rescuing people and stuff. Oh no, men are great again, it's okay. Clearly what they saw was a massive backlash. So I think it's a great question. I think you've really got to go at a total reversal of brand position and an almost total victimization of your very customers in order to get to that point where there is such a thing as bad publicity. But I almost think we shouldn't use it as an example because it is such an extreme unlikelihood. You know what I mean? That we should just focus on the fact that, yeah, you know, the other example uses you've seen the Belvedere ad with Daniel Craig, right? That's got, for my money, that has no real message in it at all, but it's brilliant at generating discussion and salience. It's a great thing to do. So yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there is such a thing as bad publicity. It's just very, very, very rare and very unlikely lightning will strike twice.
Hi, Mark. Yeah, I just wondered if you could address what I think might be a little bit of a contradiction.
Yeah.
In two things you said. One was that early on you said that people don't care about brands.
Yes.
And we shouldn't overestimate how much people care about brands. And then in the context of sort of the polarization of politics nowadays, particularly in the USA, your comment about how because of Lacoste not pulling out of Russia, you're not going to buy Lacoste shirts.
Yes.
You care about that brand. You care about what that brand stands for. You care about their principles because they've not pulled out of Russia. And in America, you've got a lot of people, a polarization in terms of people who go to Starbucks, for example, or people who buy a Ford. So I'm just wondering if there's
it's a good
not
point.
As clear cut.
I think what I would say is I care very much about the Ukraine, right, and what's happening there. If Lacoste pulled out of Russia, I would start wearing their shirts almost straight away. I wouldn't start going, ooh, I look at them differently now. It's just I want them to be punished for what I believe is something that's wrong, right? I don't think it makes Lacoste a big brand or an important brand. I think it makes Ukraine important, yeah? But it's a good point. But yeah, do I think a lot about Lacoste? No, I think a lot about Ukraine. I try to remember it after all this time. If Lacoste did, as I hope they will, eventually pull out, I would immediately start wearing their shirts again and not think about it anymore. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's the point, right? It's the Lacoste thing is not the thing, it's the Ukraine thing that drives me, right? And I know it's a hard message because we all work on brands and I'll tell you the time I realized this first. It's quite a good example. When I was teaching at MIT, we'd made an ad for Louis Vuitton, which was all about travel. And Patrick Dumas-Chelier had made this fantastic ad, and it was all windswept images. It was actually a 60-second cinema ad. Beautiful. And we'd shown it to a class of Louis Vuitton people in France a couple of weeks before, and a couple of people had cried. It was so beautiful. And we'd all gone, wow, it's amazing, right? Then I go back to Boston, and I'm teaching, and I go to a cinema late night to watch a movie on my own, and the Louis Vuitton ad comes on. And as soon as it comes on, people, when they realize it's Louis Vuitton, start whistling and going, what a lot of bullshit. Do you know what I mean? And it was clear that I was drinking the Kool-Aid of the brands, thinking, ooh, everyone's going to love this, and Louis Vuitton's such a wonderful brand. People were just like, what a load of bollocks, what a load of rubbish this is. Where's my movie? Yeah? And you felt it all around you in the cinema. I think one of the most important precepts of brand management now is we recognize people don't care about brands. They do care about other things. But if we understand that, the brands are little things, I think we open up a much better approach to brand management. There's one other great example. You remember in the Oscars when I think it was Accenture were in charge of giving out the envelopes for the winning awards, and they got one wrong. It was a big kerfuffle the next day, and a woman posted, "This will kill McKinsey. They'll never recover from this scandal." And she'd already forgotten which brand was actually responsible for it. The cause is yes, but the brands no. They're not big things. We don't care about them. And we have to remember that as marketers. Yeah? It doesn't mean they're completely unimportant, but we overstate it dramatically, I think. There's a lady at the back and a gentleman at the front.
Sorry, I feel like our rows are taking up a lot at the moment. I wanted to ask, so it's still around the purpose side of things, but there's obviously a big balance there between the times that we sort of see brand purpose as a bit of a bad move, it tends to be when it seems forced or like inauthentic. So something that we're talking to a lot of people about on the marketing side at the moment is the importance of organic engagement, authentic growth, backing up what you're doing. But when you talk about that as a marketer, obviously there's kind of two ways that you can go with that, right? If you're going to say that you're going to focus on authentic engagement or authentic brand building, you can either actually drop the facade and do it authentically, or you can just get smarter at seeming like you're being authentic. Where do you see that balance shifting in the new year?
I think that the first option allied with my point that we aren't doing it to make money, and in fact we're losing a bit of money because we believe in this, which is very hard to do if you're a PLC or a listed company, right? That's why they're all, I think you're right, they're the two options. I think we have to be more organic about it and more genuine and authentic, but also not just saying that we're really doing the purpose, but also that we're not going to make significantly more growth or profit from this. That's not the point, yeah? So I think that we will get that way for some brands. Remember, for other brands, they won't have purpose. Pret a Manger is a great example, right? Pret a Manger for 25 years now has taken all the food off its shelves at night and given it to homeless shelters. Not all the time, they get busted all the time because they've just thrown sandwiches away, but a lot of the time they actually do that. They don't talk about it because they know nobody gives a fuck about it. It's not why you go and have your coffee at Pret in the morning. They do it because it's a good thing to do, yeah? And I think that's the kind of thing we look for. Maybe there's a lot of purpose out there that we're not going to speak about. We just do it for the sake of doing it. We don't have to market it. Maybe people don't all have to know about it. That's another, option for us. I think we're getting more mature, to your point, finally, about this. And that maturity is a good thing. It's getting more complex. We're at the Dunning-Kruger kind of dip now. We're starting to realize, oh shit, this is fucking complicated stuff, right? And I think that's all for the better, right? My main point about purpose is that it's a strategy. And if it's a strategy, it's a choice. And it will work for some brands and it won't work for others. And it's okay to make that choice, to say we choose to be purposeful or we choose not to be. Doesn't mean you're an evil fuck if you choose not to. You just got a different strategy. So I'd like us to have the ability to make it, the guys that sell purpose courses are very good at broad brush. If you don't have purpose, you're going to go out of business, right? That's nonsense. It works for some brands is the other nuance I'd like. For other brands, it doesn't. I think we have to have that in there.
Thank you. Hello?
Hello.
So my question would be, when you're curating these top 10 marketing moments, or even 11, including the Kanye, I'm wondering, what is your criteria among the many happenings in 2022?
It's super scientific. So what I do is I get these test tubes, right, and I get Excel out and I put a white coat on. And then what I do is my rough rubric is there's two things, right? I want big stories, obviously, but also stories that illustrate something important to marketers, about what's going on. I mean, kind of back to the previous question about purpose, Those two stories of Patagonia and Unilever are both big news stories in marketing, but they also kick up this bigger issue of where is purpose going in our discipline, given that we all lost our collective shit over it about 4 or 5 years ago. Are we getting to a more mature, nuanced place? So that's what I'm trying to do. But it's hugely subjective and based also upon, can I get some dildo ads in there somewhere as well, right? That's the other criteria that I obviously operate with as well. The dildo score comes weighted quite highly here, right?
Okay, thank you.
You're more than welcome. It's what the Queen would have wanted to. Anymore, this gentleman down here has had a question for a while. We haven't forgotten you, sir.
Cheers. You mentioned an expected growth in private label.
Yes.
And the last couple of times we've seen recession, that growth has maintained post.
Spot on.
What would you say is the biggest opportunity for brands to try and defend against that?
It's a great question. So first of all, let's replay what you just said. It's very smart and very true. So when you look at private label in the UK going from 20% to 50% penetration, it does it during the recessionary periods, and then it doesn't drop back much, ever. So the recessions are kind of breeders for private label. What should a brand do in that situation? It's too fucking late is the first point, right? What brands should have done before private label and the recession hit is built their salience, to some degree built their brand image, defended their position. Because remember, and it's a very little known fact this, in categories where private label grows, it destroys brand 5, 4, 3 completely. But brand 2, and especially brand 1 in the category, actually are more successful as private label grows versus the pre-private label levels. Heinz Ketchup is a more successful brand today because of private label than it was before we had lots of private label around it. There's a couple of reasons for that. It's destroyed the branded alternatives, and retailers are framing their private label offer, like we talked about earlier, against the premium brand, which is more expensive. They want that frame. They want to communicate that context. So you want to be the number one brand, and you want to have already built your brand in the good times before this shit comes in. Less discounting, more long brand advertising, yeah? Because that is the only real deterrent to private label, which is a commodity, is your brand equity. But it's no good, and I've been through this in Australia with a number of clients going, shit, private label's coming, let's build brand. It's too fucking late for that now, right? It takes years to build brand. You had to be doing it for the last 10 years to feel good about what's about to come in now with private label. So yeah, brand is the ultimate deterrent, but you had to be doing it for a long time before. A couple more.
Shall I just shout? I like your stagflation point a lot.
Better than the dildo ad?
Yeah,
Okay.
But my question is, where should the marketing director be going to actually go and get the budget from the CFO and the CEO? Because they are, generally speaking, poor on numbers, shall we say?
Yeah, we've had this problem for a while. I was working with a very famous retailer yesterday on exactly this point, right? So I call your question the question. It comes up, as it just has here, every single thing I ever do, as it did yesterday and it did today and it will do tomorrow. How do we get more money and how do we get more of it devoted to brand building? And so what I did I used to have loads of good bullshit answers, none of which were really true, because I don't do this. I don't ever get money for companies, right? I help them spend it. So when this question came up so often, and it is a good question, I finally picked 6 CMOs around the world who'd gone to a company that hadn't spent enough and had spent too much on performance. And this CMO had fixed it. And I asked all 6 of them, what did you do? Because annoying people keep asking me this fucking question and I don't know the answer. So I'd like to be able to answer the question. And I wrote an article, which is probably one of my best articles, because it's not really my stuff, it's the CMO stuff, which is the 5 or 6 things they said they did. And the short answer was, first of all of them said, you have to have the remit. So you have to kind of come into a company that has fucked itself because it realized we didn't spend enough and we didn't do enough on brand. That really helps. It's pretty hard to do it if you're not brought in to fix it. You need case studies. We do a lot of work with econometrics and stuff, and we try and show, if you did this with my brand, we get that. I don't think that necessarily is persuasive. We have thousands of case studies, often from your industry, that we can call on to show this is the right level of investment and this is where we should use more money. And then the other one, which was very interesting, was link the case for brand building to what the executive or board team already think is important. Marketers are very naive about managing up, right? They try and make a case for more investment, but that's not the way to do it. The way to handle an executive board is to find out what they already care about and attach more investment and brand building to achieving whatever the hell these guys want, yeah? Which I thought was a very smart option. So I think they're the key answers, right? The one thing I'm not in favor of is econometrics. Even though they offer us, this very complex solution, my fear is marketers don't understand it. It's ropey math for a lot of them. I had a French girlfriend when I was 16, and I tried to hang on to her by speaking French badly to her. And you want to see disgust. You need to see it on the face of a 16-year-old French girl as her English boyfriend butchers French, right? And I think a lot of marketers are like that with econometrics. They take some dodgy, ropey study, quantitative study they don't understand, and they go up to the finance team and they present it, and the finance team are like, this is fucking bullshit, mate. You don't even understand it yourself. I think it's better if we make the case from other industries where there is tremendous data now showing how much we should be spending and showing where we should be spending it, and use those case studies to make the case. I think it's super important. But it is the question of the moment. So yeah, so it's the one we always censor. One more gentleman there.
It's kind of a related point to one you given before on private label. But I'm kind of intrigued what your view is of the strategy of the likes of Tesco and Sainsbury's, basically within the Cowley, to effectively advertise
Yeah.
Aldi prices and Tesco.
I wrote an article a long time about this, which is very popular with Aldi people around the world. And I've been told, it's not my opinion, it's their opinion. And I referred to Aldi as a shark, yeah? That hasn't really got a brain and just fucking does things because that's the way it does it, right? You know, have you been in the offices of Aldi? They don't even have toilets, right? Like office toilets. You have to use the customer toilets, right? They're just fucking barbarians, right? And the Aldi guys went, we fucking love that article. That's exactly right. We're fucking sharks. That's what we are. We don't care. We got no brain. But it's true, right? They're a machine. I don't think any of the British supermarkets can do anything except let Aldi take more and more share to a certain point, right? And your point's a great one. What we've seen with Jack's from Tesco. So that was a good time for me, right? When Tesco opened Jack's, which was their Aldi fighter brand, I just wrote an article the day they opened it in Marketing Week saying, this won't work, it's shit. And then they shut it 2 years later, and I wrote another article saying, yeah, they shut it because it's shit. Here's my earlier column, right? But it wasn't even a very good prediction. You could tell straight away that you can't beat Aldi by being Aldi. Partly because we've already got a brand that does that. It's called Aldi. And second, you're Tesco, not Aldi. Yeah? You can't strategically be better than you're playing. I'll give it to you in a more newsworthy fashion, right? How do you beat Roger Federer? Don't fucking play him at tennis. See, that's it. That's it. Now, what do you play him at? What does Tesco do to combat Aldi? I don't know. Maybe there's nothing, right? But you sure as shit aren't going to win by copying them and trying to be more Aldi than Aldi. That's the point, right? Strategy isn't copying. Strategy is selfish and finding your approach. So no, I think it's a really hard point in a classroom like this. When I taught at MIT, I was telling one of the guys this morning, I had this class once at MIT where I'd been working for a very large drinks brand with Costco. And we'd just been doing the negotiations while I was working in the States. And my class was just a picture of our champagne brand being discounted by Costco. And a question for the class, and the class is 90 minutes long, MBA class, what would you do to fix this, right? And they knew very little about distribution or pricing or anything. So most of their suggestions weren't just stupid, they were illegal and they ended up going to jail inside the class, right? So we went through an hour of suggestions and I patiently explained why they're all stupid, right? And at the end of the class, they said, well, what's the answer? And I said, there isn't one. Why would you think there's an answer to this? We didn't fix it when we went to California last week. We got scalped. Yeah? There isn't an answer to big retail. Why would you think there's an answer to every question? Yeah? And it blew their minds, apparently. And I'm like, well, didn't you fucking know that? There's, we call it the shaft, right? When you go and visit big retail and you're a supplier, you get the shaft and it pierces the body, right? Your job isn't some kung fu move to evade the shaft and turn it round and stab Aldi with it. Your job is to stop the shaft from piercing any of your essential organs so you can survive. That's what it's like to deal with big retail, right? And in the same token, I don't think there is a solution for Tesco or Sainsbury's versus Aldi. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think there has to be, because sometimes when you have a great strategy, and it's only happened to me 2 or 3 times in my career, what's great about it is whatever everyone else does now, there's nothing they can do and you're going to win. It doesn't always play out that way, but when you've got a really good strategy, you've got all the bases covered, you just sit back and go, whatever they do now, we have them, right? I think that's where Aldi is. They're just so good at that, right? And if you ever study Aldi and the Albrechtsen brothers, right, it is a DNA story of, post-World War Germany, austerity, a brilliant couple of entrepreneurs that were bred in probably the most painful economic conditions of modern times. That's where Aldi comes from. That's why it's so tough, And so, yeah, I don't think there is a solution. And I think one of the skills of modern executive life, now I hang out with like CMOs and stuff, is to avoid those. If someone offers you the job of strategy director at Tesco, don't take it, right? No, I'm serious, right? I'm serious. One of the skills of brand management is working out which brands to go and work for, which ones to not. Do you know what I mean? That's half the battle. So yeah, I don't think there is a solution. And that, let's remember, is sometimes, unfortunately, the end of the class, right? Is there isn't an answer. We're not doing algebra here. You know what I mean?
Well, I think, thank you very much indeed, because I think we've had the questions, and they've been absolutely
Very good questions.
So thank you very much for your questions, but I have to thank you
Thank you, Mary.
for being, our most famous alumni.
Really? You think so?
Really? Oh.
There's James May, like there's the top gig guy. And Gollum, and you've got Gollum as well, right? He's super famous. You're never going to beat that Gollum guy.
But it's been
Third most famous.
And it's been brilliant to hear vocabulary that we don't hear that often, and hear authors that we don't hear that often. So thank you very much
Thank you, Mary.
for coming, and thank you for being here.
My pleasure. And, thank you, Lily.